So I just have one question for the panel, and then we'll open, I think, to questions from the audience. But as I listen to everybody talking, and as I watch these counter-narratives, and also as I've covered terrorism over the years, I know this is not a word that's usually associated with terrorism, but it strikes me that the really important narrative for so many people, the really important question is the narrative of terrorism. And the narrative is often essentially romantic. And I don't mean in terms of getting married, although that may be part of it, but it is romantic in the sense that people identify with a narrative that makes them heroes, whether heroes in their religion or heroes in their society. I think it's no accident that the seminal ideological work of Al-Qaeda by Ayman Zawahiri is called Knights Under the Prophet's Banner. Not Knights N-I-G-H-T, but K-N-I-G-H-T. It's chivalric, it's heroic. And I wonder if that isn't the hardest thing in developing a counter-narrative, is to say, you know, you can't just say to young people, especially young men or young women, we don't want you to be heroes. You have to, I guess, show them how they can be heroes. And I just wondered if you would like to reflect on that.
I'll say something. Does this turn on? Is this on?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. Didn't know. Oh, okay. That's why we created the realjihad.org, because we realized we're not as good as ISIS. ISIS is offering something really cool, right? You get to be a hero. You get to fight for justice and dignity and purpose, you know, for the downtrodden. I like that. You know, sign me up. But of course I hate ISIS, but we're trying to break that and say, no, that's not real. And the people that did it didn't like it and it didn't work out for them. But then what are you left with? Nothing, right? What are you supposed to do now? And you're already riled up, you're upset about the grievances that ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Al-Shabaab have shown you, or that you're living yourself. So we created the realjihad.org, and it's just starting, and we're struggling with, you know, really thank you to Qatar that they did put our program on steroids, but we're struggling with that we're a small organization and we want to blow it up big, and we want to make the realjihad.org a place that you could go and you could find out, what can I do when I think that things are wrong? And my daughter is sitting here, she's somebody that's telling me all the time, the world is wrong, it's not right, it's not just. What should you do? So, you know, we have to provide answers, right? And I call that redirection. We have to redirect people. And that's one of the reasons, forgive me for saying this, but I like terrorists. I like their passion. I like that they want to change the world. Everything else I hate. But I like people that care. Because, you know, I hope you care too. But we have to give them something to do.
Thank you. Any? No?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, you know, anyone could be vulnerable. It doesn't really, it's not even based on your faith. I think, based on my experience, is that a lot of our youth who are disengaged are just looking for life opportunities. And it's like joining a gang. You relatively, you know, the recruitment is the same. They prey upon people who are vulnerable, who are looking for a way out, looking for a way to make their parents proud, or, you know, their communities looking down on them. And, you know, when someone is down on their luck, they tend to explore things and willing to take a risk, right, to see a change in their life. So it's something that we just need to be mindful that when we're telling people what, you know, don't join, but also tell them, but do this, right? Here's how you make, you know, a better Muslim community. This is how you should be engaged in civic engagement if you're, you know, frustrated with foreign affairs or whatever the case might be. So, and yeah, just the whole point, I think it's people, especially our youth, like, you know, they're looking just for life opportunities. They're willing to make a difference, and they have vulnerabilities, but people are good at exploiting that, and we just need to be good at, you know, building upon their strengths and directing them to be positive members of our community.
Maybe, maybe just to pick it up from Mohammed and Professor Ann, and some of the experiences that we've seen in Kenya. Chris has talked about what we usually discuss as the pull and push factors. And this romantic world is usually among the pull factors, because generally they discuss the push factors as being unemployment, poverty, and this kind of things. But the pull factors is what the extremists are selling to these youths who are being radicalized. The rosy romantic picture of the second world, where they're going to have everything that they always need. And I remember myself when I was in college at the university, I mean, we were so adventurous and we were radicals. And we usually say that being a radical is not really a bad thing. At times you change society positively. But being an extremist, of course, and a violent extremist is what we are trying to mitigate and fight. So I think what we're facing with Al-Shabaab is also this kind of propaganda. And some of the returnees that we've been interviewing and talking to, some of those who've been disengaged, talk about their failed dreams when they were taken to Somalia. They were promised, some young man was talking about getting these beautiful, black-eyed, long-haired women, you know. and that's not the dream. He found that even within Al-Shabaab, there's discrimination. If you come from Kenya and you're not Somali, then you can't get the beauties that you talk about. So these are kind of the things that they came out and start giving in the counter-narratives that our dream was failed. We were promised to be given this kind of monies. When you got there, I was going to be a commander with AK-47 on the action. So what we're doing is to disaggregate these different groups, because we realize that the people who join Al-Shabaab usually were taken there through different motivations. We have the real ideologues, like the university student who led the Garissa University attack. It's in a different category. And then we have the young adventurous youths who are going to seek adventure. They really don't care so much about the ideology, but they want to be part of the action. And then the third group, you have those who have been conned. By conning, I mean, a young lady was telling us that she had been promised to get a job in Dubai, in the UAE, and then on the last day when she was supposed to travel, she was dragged. She didn't even know when she crossed Kenya into Somalia to find herself in the forest and being put as a wife to so many fighters. So we disaggregate these different segments when we do for them, de-radicalization. And that's also just to saying that they used to become so vulnerable because they really need action at that time, the adrenaline and things. So I think the counter-narratives are really starting to work positively in the way we are seeing.
Natasha, is there a difference in the romanticism of the women?
Well, yeah. I think that actually it's a pretty universal feeling. So, and I actually think you ask a really important question. I'm a huge fan of Star Wars, and I suspect I'm probably not alone. And the reason why Star Wars is such a good and popular story is that it's an archetypal hero journey, right? It's this kind of story that cultures throughout the world and across time have told to help explain their myth. And that's really important. It tells a story of somebody who is bigger, part of something bigger than who he is. And we all want that, right? I'm lucky that I grew up in the context and situation that I did, that my hero journey was to join the UN. But it could have been a different kind of story for me. And it is a different kind of story for a lot of people. And so I think actually, when we think about how do we counter that kind of romantic narrative, it's the kind of work that Anne is doing, that others in here are doing, that the UN is doing is super important. But in a lot of ways, it really comes down to governments. Because if you're somebody who's disaffected, if you feel oppressed and marginalized, if the only hero journey you can imagine for yourself is to join a violent extremist group, the government has to be the one who can create the counter-narrative for you that says, no, this is your hero story. Be a part of this bigger story. This nation that you belong to is the thing that's bigger than you, is your journey. And I think that what David said, how David closed his remarks, is absolutely key, that when governments react to terrorism or threats of terrorism and radicalization to violent extremism through oppression and through hard security responses where they aren't addressing the underlying grievances or perceived grievances. They're not giving those kinds of opportunities for that kind of narrative that's larger to be created. And I know I didn't answer your question specifically
That's
about
okay.
women, but I think that for women it's no different. We, a woman no different than a man wants to be part of something bigger than herself. For most women, the way that we're socialized, that thing usually has to do with something romantic. So there is often something there, but not for all women.
I think we'll open this up to questions. Any questions?
Can you hear me?
You were all in
Actually,
a
I
row,
think
actually.
Natasha sort of started to answer the question I was going to ask, but Dr. Speckert is a mentor of mine, and I asked her a couple years ago, what is the difference diagnostically between a sociopath who commits acts of violence and a terrorist? And she answered me at this event when she was, I think it was her book release for Talking to the Terrorists. She gave me a very clear answer, which was not, I think, what most people would accept, but she said, in a way, terrorists have a moral code. They have grievances. A sociopath is just a sociopath. A terrorist has their set of grievances. So, Dr. Speckert, would you elaborate on what you told me for the audience here? And then, yeah, that's basically what I wanted to say, ask.
Well, Sasha has a good memory, and yeah, terrorists are really different than ordinary criminals, because ordinary criminals are greedy and want to enrich themselves. Terrorists usually want to change their communities. They want to address grievances that are bigger than just something that's happening to them. And it might not even be happening to them. It might be only happening to other people that they feel a kinship to. And that's the part that I do admire, because we should all care so much. But the methods that they engage in are absolutely wrong. But it's not being a psychopath. A psychopath has no moral code and is just self-serving, where a terrorist is trying to serve his community, but is very deluded in believing that attacking innocent civilians is the way to do it.
Back here? No, it's you with the microphone in your hand.
Thank you. I'm Kent Davis Packard from Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies in Washington, and I'm really interested in how we saw the two videos. I'm wondering, are there some videos where they're talking specifically about the grievances caused by governments, and what, if any, is your dialogue like with governments? When you say you want to address root causes, I would think you might have some engagement with governments. Thank you.
Sure. A lot of the videos the people talk about, especially the Iraqis, we were allowed into the prison in Iraq, and a lot of the Iraqis, Sunnis, say that ISIS came particularly in Mosul, the people that we interviewed in Mosul, or in Baghdad, but they were from Mosul. ISIS promised us we'd have a Sunni state. ISIS promised us that we would have our rights restored. And as they're speaking, you know, I feel pity just to think that they thought that this horribly brutal, un-Islamic, corrupt organization could give them answers. But I also feel sad that the government of Iraq needs to deliver. And I think they're saying themselves that they're corrupt. And you know, they need to clean their act up, and they need to be, you know, truly pluralistic and fair. Otherwise, these groups are going to continue to exist. And Artie and I were in Baghdad. We were so upset. We landed on the day that they declared victory, and the guys told us, you can't go in the prison, it's a holiday. And we were like, oh, yay. So we went out and observed the holiday, which was really interesting, but we were ticked because we were there for research interviews. But I guess we did a different kind of research. But has ISIS been defeated? Has ISIS been defeated in Iraq? I mean, Chris, you know, you're following that.
No, but I do think there is an element That's interesting. I used to have as a sort of a rule of thumb on terrorism that most terrorists were motivated by three elements. One was testosterone, a lot of young men with a lot of energy. Second was narrative, which we talked about. But the third was theater. This worked very neatly out to TNT, you see. But the theater is important. And the idea that you can project yourself on the world stage by blowing yourself up, by being the violent jihadist, I think actually, in an ironic way, terrorism became so commonplace that you couldn't do that anymore. It's not exceptional to blow yourself up. You're just another kid blown to smithereens. Nobody remembers your name. And I think that's important in fighting the narrative. Say, nobody's going to remember you. Nobody's going to care, except the people you kill.
Okay, but Natasha, that brings up another issue of gender, because we know when the Chechens took over the theater and everybody watched 40 terrorists, 20 of them women. Why did 20 women go to the theater? We're fascinated with women when they enact violence. And probably because we all had mothers and they could take us out, right? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of scary. It's way back here in your mind, you know, is she going to take me out now? And the violence of women is fascinating, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's something that is still so exceptional because it defies our stereotypes of what women are capable of, what women want, what their roles are. And like I said, I think for so many women, it's just as the draw to the adventurism, the draw to being on the battlefield is just as strong for men.
But the numbers of women who are suicide bombers is much lower. And there are some organizations like Boko Haram that now use a lot of women and little girls to carry out suicide bombings. Even the sensationalism of that has subsided. And we also have a long record of women suicide bombers, dating back at least to the days in Lebanon when we first saw them, or in India for Rajiv Gandhi. So I think that exceptionalism of women suicide bombers is not as great as it used to be. And I hate to say it, but maybe one of the biggest counter narratives is boredom. If people think that terrorism is boring, then they have to be heroes some other way.
Bravo.
I hope nobody was bored here. We have a question?
Chris, it's a perfect segue. So I'm wondering, why has ISIS, Al-Shabaab, fill in the blank, fallen from American headlines in particular? And what, are you concerned about that, or what do you all think about that?
What was the active, does it out of the headlines, or what was that?
They've fallen out of the headlines.
Yeah.
And are you concerned about that?
Well, I have two words for that. Donald Trump. He sucks all the oxygen out of the news cycle. And it's also what I was saying earlier. It's not news. Terrorism, it's horrible to say, but it's not news. There have been really pretty bad terrorist actions, even here in New York, in the last year. Nobody talks about it.
Yeah. I just want to add that for the larger, population in the U.S., you might feel like no one is talking about Al-Shabaab, but if you're in the Somali community, you're getting direct phone calls of family members who are sitting at a restaurant eating and just end up, in the middle of a bomb, right? So it definitely impacts a certain community. And I'm kind of actually disappointed that it's not, on the news as much. It's like we're so just like aghast with terrorism. It's like the school shootings that happen, right? School shooting happens, and there are ones that were just on the media for maybe just 48 hours, and like people just move on, or less. But it's also another factor is that probably people starting to realize that it's a generational effort, right? It's not like where you could send a military, take people out, right? We've tried that. It's an ideology, and to fight an ideology, I think you needed to do it academically. You need to do it on the ground. but also, like, you know, the media needs to play its role of, you know, showing, you know, what the realities are on the ground. However, there is a counter narrative to that as well. When you show too much Al-Shabaab, it tends to also radicalize people as well, right? Why are they always demeaning us, right? Why are they always showing us, like, on the media, right? Why are, you know, this school shooter not labeled a terrorist, right? So that itself also feeds into media bias, and that's how a lot of these sort of media biases end up in Al-Shabaab recruitment videos. And they show news cables, right? And they show U.S. politicians or lawmakers saying negative things, right? And they use that as a recruitment method. So it's something that definitely needs to be looked at in a deeper manner.
I guess, can I just say too, the video you saw of Sama, she told us, you know, in Belgium I was watching news, but anything the news says, I didn't trust it. You know, she's part of the Muslim community, and she's like, they always condemn Muslims. I didn't believe it. Anything they said about ISIS, no, I don't think it's true. That's scary.
I would also say that when the headlines really forget about terrorism, I get very nervous. In the mid-1990s, I was based in Cairo, and I was constantly writing for Newsweek, and I was constantly telling New York, we got to watch this bin Laden guy. He's really dangerous. And there's all this stuff going on, and there's all this anger out here, and I can tell you exactly how it works. And it was like, yeah, no, it's not really, we're not really thinking about that too much. I wound up writing a novel just to try and make it happen, because actually one of the things that concerned me is I realized there was a lot of racism involved in the reaction to a discussion of terrorism. So if I was writing about someone named Mohammed or Ahmed or whatever, I knew that editors in New York were essentially turning the page. And it wasn't, and so my novel was about a guy from a Bosnian background who's blonde, blue-eyed, 6 feet tall, and looks all American.
Did you name him Ardian?
Well, he does now. No, but his last name's Kurtovic, which is a good Bosnian name.
But also, just to add on what Chris is saying, I think the experience we had in Kenya, and what Mohammed is saying with Al-Shabaab, is that they have a very robust propaganda tool that they use. And on the flip side, if you see the way at times they use the media, it's like they get free advertisement when they create an attack. And the media, they don't have to pay. The money is a private company will pay to have a headline. So we have a robust program also with our media owners on how to report on issues of terrorism. And it's really started working positively, because now we are seeing a trend where they're moving from huge attacks, like they had the twin embassy bombings in Kenya and Jerusalem in '98, and the 9/11 here in the United States and New York. They're going for a small lone wolf attack, spectacular attack, but they want to terrorize the whole world through the media, social media, because all these things find their way globally online. I was here in our mission in New York in 2013 when Westgate happened, and it was all over international media, and my friend in the US were like, is this happening in your country? It's like a movie. But you see, they get that kind of reporting, and they terrorize everybody in different parts of the world. So the media really also has to take stock on how to report on issues of terrorism, and we're working on that in the country.
But of course, the problem with social media is that there's really no way to control this. And we don't want to control it. But in the old days, you could talk to the responsible media and say, let's try and deal with this. But one of the things that's happened in the media over the years is that our job's gotten much more dangerous, basically because the bad guys don't need us anymore. In the old days, you would go to interview bin Laden, for instance, and you were the way he was going to get his message out. And now Al-Qaeda's got its own TV network. So that's a huge change in addressing the whole question of how the media relates to this and how the consumers of terrorist media relate to it. So they don't have to go to CNN or the BBC. They go directly to the Al-Qaeda or ISIS networks.
And I think one more challenge that our community is dealing with. Last year we did a training for like over 40 parents on how do you identify, you know, radicalization and prevention and intervention. And a lot of the parents here's what they said. They said, all of our kids have smartphones. But with all honesty, like, if my son was watching the ISIS recruitment video, I wouldn't know. Even if you showed me, I would think it's a movie, right? So there is a huge generational gap, right? Sometimes you'll have a father and you have a son who having a hard time communicating because the son is speaking English, he's losing his native tongue, and the father is busy working, doesn't have much time to learn English, right? So that generation gap is what ISIS and extremist organizations, what they target. And they use Nike and Adidas and basketball and whatever sports that a lot of our youth are into in targeting them. So a lot of recruitment videos you'll see, you know, a recruiter or, you know, someone in the video wearing a Nike t-shirt. You can just do it. And they change their phrases. And that might trigger a youth who's already vulnerable and looking for a way out. So while we also, you know, trying to counter these narratives, I think a lot of our refugee and immigrant communities, especially parents, are in a very tough situation because they're not accustomed to this Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. They don't understand it.
I think we could go on, but I think we really have run out of time now. I want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank, is the ambassador still here? Or she's gone? She had to leave at 9 o'clock probably.
Well, she had other duties. She's an ambassador.
In any case, I want to thank all of you for coming. And I hope you learned something tonight. I certainly did. I think I feel greatly encouraged by the work that you all are doing.
Thank you.
And I'm going to be watching it closely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to thank all of you, too. If I could just thank all of you, because I know a lot of people in the room are doing work equal to what we're doing, and bravo to you, and keep it up, please. And anything we can do to support you, we're happy to do it. And again, thank you to our sponsors for this beautiful evening. Thank you to the Embassy of Qatar.
Thank you.